are definitely still interlinked enough, but absolutely meant for different habitats. And that's why it's so important that we help protect the sea ice habitat that polar bears depend on for survival. And that's another great question from Miss Cermelli, and I hope I'm saying that right, from that classroom. What can my 5th grade class do to help the polar bears? Thank you so much for asking. Yeah, the cool thing about polar bears is that anyone in the world can help protect polar bears, because the problem for polar bears is their declining sea ice habitat. And what's causing that is a warming atmosphere. So when we burn fossil fuels like coal, oil, and gas, we release heat-trapping carbon dioxide into the atmosphere. And in regular amounts, that's okay. But we are burning rampant amounts and releasing too much carbon into the atmosphere, and we're thickening this sort of heat trapping blanket around Earth. And we all know when we have, we're trapping too much heat, we're wearing a sweater that's too thick or a blanket that's too heavy, it's uncomfortable. So we're making Earth uncomfortable with all the warmth. And we also know that ice melts when it's warm. And so we're seeing a reduction in the sea ice habitat. And polar bears depend on sea ice for hunting, their main prey, seals. They use sea ice for traveling, for mating, and sometimes even for denning, actually having their babies on the sea ice. So it really is, what their life is for. But the cool thing is that anything you can do to reduce carbon in your community is going to help the polar bear. So this could be things like organizing a bike bus at your school, encouraging other students that you go to school with to walk or bike to school, or to kind of, instead of a carpool, have a bike pool. So you get a group of kids and a couple adults that can get to school safely that way. Give your teachers and parents some homework. Have them kind of look at where your energy is coming from for your school and your home. Is it possible to look at more renewable sources, use more energy from nature like solar and wind? One cool thing you can also do is write letters to leaders in your neighborhoods, in your communities and schools. Let your leaders know that you support decisions that protect the environment, because everything that we do to protect polar bears helps protect people too. Sea ice is good for the whole planet. It keeps us all cool. It's like Earth's air conditioner. And it's just going to keep the whole atmosphere cooler, which helps keep Earth in better balance. So yeah, you're basically saving money on energy bills, and you're helping yourselves, and you're helping polar bears. So it's a pretty special situation. If you do want to know more specific ideas, or you need kind of a toolkit to get you started, check out the Get Involved section of the polarbearsinternational.org website. We've got all sorts of resources you can download and use in your class or at home, and kind of help you get started. And please do reach out to us if you have questions or want to be connected to other schools that have done projects like this. We want to help get people connected and feel empowered to do what's going to work for you in your community. We can all do individual actions at home, and that's important, but it's better to work in big groups to make change. You're not alone. We're all in this together, and our neighborhoods, our communities, our provinces or states or countries can make changes bigger if we work together. So it's pretty great. So thank you so much for asking. So excited that you guys are watching today. And we are still keeping an eye on, what's the cam look? Are we still looking at Victor? So Victor has headed off into the bushes here. His buddy misses him, potentially. So we just saw the guy he was sleeping with earlier, sleeping next to, kind of get up and head over his way. And we see, I'm going to check out what's on the camera right now. Oh yeah, checking him out. So polar bears are, I think they're very aware of each other out here. Of course, they have such an incredible sense of smell. They can smell for maybe about up to a kilometer away, depending on the wind direction. They can probably have a pretty good sense of smell of each other. We sometimes see them pick up scents from quite a ways. And if it's a small or vulnerable bear, so, a mom with a cub or a small subadult, and we'll see them sometimes stick their nose in the air and just take off running in the other direction. And we can't see what's going on, but sure enough, in a moment or two or in a couple minutes, we see a big lumbering, potentially dangerous bear come this way. So bears are definitely, they're going to preserve themselves and try to stay out of the way of any other bear that could cause them harm. But when you're a big adult male like these guys, you're kind of at the top of the food chain. Nothing's going to cause you too much harm, so they can be a little more relaxed. Check each other out without being too worried. There are a few smaller bears around that we'll keep an eye out for. And in the meantime, we'll keep our eye on Victor and his friend here, who we'll try to get maybe a little closer to in a moment. You guys are just getting great screenshots too. That is fantastic. Very cool. Okay, a couple more questions coming in. Thank you so much. What do we have here? Oh, cool. When two polar bears buddy up, could that mean that they are of the opposite sex? When is their typical mating season? So at this time of year, we would tend to see animals of the same sex buddy up. Usually the males will buddy up. We don't often really, if ever, see that with females. I'm not going to say never, but it's not very common with females to do that. Oh, we're getting another pooping bear. That's our second one today on camera. That's pretty funny. Yeah, so we usually do see the males hang out at this time of year. Now, in the spring, when they are competing for mates, males are going to be a lot more filled with testosterone and not wanting to just hang out with each other. If two males encounter each other and there's a female in the middle, there will be a fight. But at that time of year, you'd see the male and female hanging out together for a couple of weeks, potentially at a time, while they're mating. And then again, they would go their separate ways. So, yeah, another reason why Churchill is so special and unique that we see these larger groups of bears. We've kind of been calling it a flurry of polar bears when we see groups of bears, which is kind of fun. But it looks like these two are going to maybe meet up, touch noses again potentially, or go the other way. Hard to say. Again, there's, like Greg was saying, there's probably a lot of communication going on between these two that humans just can't quite fully grasp. But it's sure neat to watch and get it caught on the cam. So we'll keep an eye on these guys, see if they're going to come together and do anything again, or maybe they'll just go back to sleep. So at this time of year, maybe I'll pass it over to Greg so you don't have to keep hearing me just talk at you. Maybe we can circle back to the idea of polar bears being on land right now, resting, conserving energy. There used to be this idea that there was maybe they're in some sort of walking hibernation or their metabolism was slowed down. But what do we see going on out here right now? Why are they napping so much?
Well, that's a great question. And the research tells us that they're napping so much because they're trying to save energy. If the sea ice was out there, the bears would be too. And that's where polar bears, in parts of their range farther north, where the sea ice persists through the summer, polar bears will stay on that sea ice and hopefully continue feeding. But in the southern parts of their range, like in Hudson Bay and James Bay and to the east in Baffin Bay and Davis Strait, the sea ice melts completely in the summer and polar bears are forced to migrate onshore. And when they're onshore, they don't have access to the seals that are their primary prey and the most energetically important part of their nutrition. And so without access to seals, they do this. They lie around and they sleep and they walk around a little bit, but for the most part, they're in an energy conserving state. And there is some similarity between what these bears are doing physiologically to what black bears and brown bears do in the den when they're hibernating. There's some evidence that they drop their body temperature a little bit, not like small mammals that hibernate that drop their body temperature down to 4 or 5 degrees Celsius. These bears are likely dropping their body temperature just down a degree or two. And they're also using their fat stores to fuel their metabolism. They're quite efficient at largely sparing their lean tissue, so they're not experiencing bone density loss like we would if we went a long time without feeding or being active. They're largely sparing their muscle. They're not generating a whole lot of energy from breaking down their muscles. They're generating their energy from their fat stores, which is really efficient way to get through these long periods where there's not much to eat. And so they're saving up their energy so that they can get back onto the sea ice as soon as it forms in the next few weeks. And that sea ice will be hugely important for the whole rest of the year. But we do have some evidence that's emerging that even though the bears get back onto the sea ice in early November, hopefully, or mid-November, or in some cases not until late December, they're back on the ice and they have access to seals, but still hunting conditions through the winter can be pretty bad. It's dark, obviously, storms are common, the ice is thick, and there's maybe not a lot of seals available through much of the winter. So they can really be losing weight throughout the year until they get to the springtime, when ring seals start to produce pups, and those pups fatten up and become really rich energy sources in late spring and early summer for polar bears to capture and consume and really put on the weight, the big fat stores that they need to come back on shore in good shape, and then use those stored fats for survival during this ice-free period. So having that supply of seals and that availability of sea ice, and really the right kind of sea ice in the spring, is so crucially important for polar bears, because without that spring sea ice, they're not going to have sufficient body stores to come on shore and be in good condition that'll let them survive and reproduce during this onshore period.
I've got a question for you.
Sure.
So one question, maybe you could just talk a little bit about kind of the different areas that polar bears live in and how they'll experience maybe sea ice or habitat change differently. So, for example, we know where we are, Western Hudson Bay. These polar bears do share Hudson Bay with Southern Hudson Bay bears to the south and Fox Basin bears to the north. In Western Hudson Bay, we've seen a decline of about 30% in 40 years, but that doesn't necessarily mean that all the different 19 polar bear subpopulations are going to decline in that way, at that rate, in the same vein. And in fact, Fox Basin bears are experiencing something a little different up there with maybe a new predator coming in. It's kind of interesting. Maybe you could tell folks about it.
Yeah, for sure. And, when we think of polar bears, we think of this very far away, exotic, remote, Arctic animal. And to a large extent, that's true, right? We find polar bears in abundance in the very far north. But we also find polar bears in abundance in the pretty far south. And where I've done quite a bit of work in James Bay, that's about James Bay, which is shared with Ontario and Quebec in Canada. That's about the same latitude as London, England. So it's not especially far north. And right here on the cam, we have polar bears rolling around in the tundra boreal a transition zone, where the landscape is transitioning from the boreal forest to the south to the open tundra to the north. So we basically have polar bears in the forest in the Churchill area. So we have polar bears over a huge range of the planet. And we shouldn't expect polar bears over that huge range of the planet to all respond to environmental change at the same time. So where we are seeing the most acute effects, the most immediate effects of climate-driven sea ice loss is, not surprisingly, in the southern parts of their range. So as Elisa mentioned, we've seen a decline of about 30% over the last 40 years in the Churchill Western Hudson Bay population. We've also seen a recent and quite rapid decline of the southern Hudson Bay population, so that population that's centered around Ontario, Canada. But just to the north in Fox Basin, that population seems to be stable. A couple of populations in Canada even seem to be increasing. The southern Beaufort Sea population that's shared with Canada and the United States and Alaska is also declining. So we really have different patterns of response to climate change. And we also have a very large part of the polar bear range where we simply don't have any good information, and we can't reliably say what populations are doing. But we do know that they inhabit a pretty complex food web. There's a lot of things going on and in the sea ice and Arctic marine ecosystems that we don't fully understand. But we are seeing some interesting evidence of changes going on. One change that we seem to be seeing is the emergence of a new top predator in Arctic seas, and that is the killer whale, which for a long time was very rare in Arctic waters. Basically, the sea ice that forms in the Arctic Ocean keeps killer whales out, because killer whales have this big dorsal fin that's easily injured by sea ice. But with the decline of sea ice cover, it's provided an opportunity for killer whales to come in, and the people of Churchill now basically see killer whales in Hudson Bay every year. And in Fox Basin, where we have a large population and nursing ground for bowhead whales, there seems to be an interesting new interaction between killer whales and bowhead whales and polar bears, where killer whales will prey on bowheads but just consume a very small part of them. And that leaves a very large bowhead carcass. It could be 18 meters long, that potentially floats and washes ashore, and then provides a very large carcass for polar bears to feed on, potentially even during the ice-free season. So that may be one contributor. There's basically a new marine food source in the form of scavenging bowhead whale remains that's contributing to the stability of the Fox Basin subpopulation, that it's not declining, despite the fact that we're seeing declining sea ice conditions in Fox Basin. So we know that there's a bunch of changes going on very rapidly in regards to sea ice conditions, and that's clearly having an effect on the overall Arctic marine food web. And exactly how those changes will play out for polar bears, some of the details remain to be seen. But certainly we know that polar bears need sea ice habitat to survive, to find mates, to find food, to make a living in the Arctic, basically. And we know that as the sea ice declines, so will polar bears. But the rate of that decline and the nature of the underlying ecological processes that drive that decline are still emerging.
Thank you so much, Greg. It's such interesting information. The Arctic is a complex, amazing ecosystem. Let's keep it around for a long time. So we've got about 10 minutes left in the chat, so I'm just going to start slowly wrapping up. And before we really wrap up, some of you may be wondering, who is driving Buggy 1? Because I said BJ had to go back into town, and he's usually our weekly buggy driver, and you all know him very well. But some of you may also recognize our current Buggy 1 driver, so I thought I would just pass it over to one of the Polar Bears International employees, Kyron. Some of you may remember him from the Beluga boat in the summer. So we do have Kyron out with us right now. He's been driving on the weekends and just, being a really valuable member of our team. So Kyron, I just wanted to give you the opportunity to say hi to your friends and tell people, what it's like driving a buggy compared to the Beluga boat.
Cool. Thanks, Elisa. Yeah. Hi, everybody. I have noticed some familiar people on the message board. It's awesome to see people still tuning in outside of where I'm used to seeing you in the Beluga boat. And like Lisa said earlier, we are driving, it's kind of like a big monster truck, and it's pretty cool and a lot different than driving the Beluga boat, that's for sure. It's interesting. I got to drive a little last year, and we're doing some more this year, and some people may see on the cam as we're moving around, the terrain is pretty crazy up here. There's lots of rocks and the trail's uneven. It's not lots of smooth sections by no means, so you got to be careful while you're cruising around and make sure you're navigating the trail properly and looking out for those big rocks and going slow and lots of big water puddles and things like that. But it's been a great experience, and it's awesome viewing the bears like the ones we have outside. It's entertaining. It's been a great year so far. There's lots of bears, lots of things to look at. So I'm looking forward to the rest of the season. Maybe I'll get a chance to talk to you guys again. I'm going to pass it over to Lisa and we'll wrap it up.
Thanks, Kyron. Yeah, it's been great hanging out with Kyron. Usually I don't get to see him very much in the summer. We talk a lot on the phone, but that's about it. So super fun in a different environment, but still in Churchill. Churchill is just such a special place. We also have to give, I guess, a quick shout out to the Northern Lights cam. So make sure that you're checking out the Northern Lights cam mounted on the Churchill Northern Study Center. Just catches amazing views in the evening. Now, of course, this time of year is a little bit hard. As the bay is cooling down and it's not quite frozen yet, it's really cloudy. So we have a lot of gray skies around this time of year. So you might not see the best northern lights, but sometimes a breeze will come through, give us a clear sky, and it's pretty spectacular. Once the bay does freeze up, again, hopefully November, aiming for November, but hopefully definitely by December sometime, then the skies will really start to clear up. And northern light season hits its peak here around February or March. So pretty neat stuff. But if you can see both polar bears under the northern lights, then that is, I mean, who could ask for any more than that? Pretty cool. Ha! Cloud's posting a lovely snapshot of you on the beluga boat, Kyron. You look great. Yeah. Thanks, Cloud. Yeah. And we did have, we had a question come in about, just staying safe in polar bear country. So it's a great question, great point. Yeah, we do have ways that we make sure we stay safe in polar bear country. And the safer we stay, the more likely we're going to keep the polar bears safe. So one thing that Polar Bears International does is when we are walking out and about in town and definitely outside of town, we are usually tending to stay in groups almost always, with very, very few exceptions. And we all carry a bear spray. Now, bear spray has been shown to be highly effective against all bears, but including polar bears. And there's some kind of misconceptions out there about bear spray, but it is a good tool. It has to be treated as such, as a tool. You got to make sure you know how to use it. It's stored properly. You're handling it safely, just like any tool that you would use for almost any job. But you probably would prefer to have it than not have it if you are ever in a polar bear encounter. I know if I'm ever in polar bear country, I'm going to have my bear spray with me. Even though it can get windy in this area, the spray comes out of the canister faster than almost any wind you would see anywhere you're going to see polar bears on land or where you might encounter them. And it does give them just a really, kind of nasty stinging smell. It does not hurt them long term, but it just stings enough to kind of get them out of your way and to get you a chance to get out yourself. So bear spray is important. It's not going to do any lasting damage, but it will prevent lasting damage. We also, when we are working in the field, we may carry a shotgun with us, which we would load with cracker shells. And then we would have slugs on us in the case of a worst case scenario. But cracker shells are kind of like a loud banging noise that you shoot out of a shotgun. So it would just kind of be like a little firework that would scare the bear away. You would kind of aim it. You wouldn't aim it at the bear. You'd aim it to the side or in front of, so that it would do a little explosion in a place that would move the bear off and just kind of startle it, make it not want to come closer. And then we do also have a little flare gun that we could use as well. Again, these are non-lethal deterrents. We'd always prefer to use non-lethal deterrents, and only in ever worst case scenarios go more than that. But we always have what we call a bear monitor when we are working in the field. So someone is designated to just be looking for bears. So it's really easy to get distracted when you've got jobs to do, whether you're doing maintenance or field work or sampling or whatever. So easy for everyone's eyes to be looking down. So you need to have someone that is only tasked with looking for polar bears and looking around constantly, because they look like they move slow on the cams, but they cover a lot of ground. It's pretty crazy how fast they can move and how quietly. So we just want to make sure people are kept safe, kept vigilant, have the tools that at the end of the day will get everyone home safely. So those are some of the things that we do. We are also working with different wildlife professionals that test deterrents, that look at what are effective, that collect data on what's been used across the Arctic and in other parts of the world on other bears, to make sure that we do have good tools for folks to use and people just have the information they need to make the well-informed decisions. So it looks like it's hard to say if we'll have an interaction. These boys do just seem to like being in the vicinity of each other. Victor moved over, and then this other guy just, I guess, had to be closer, so came back over to him. They're basically just shifting down the willows all evening. Pretty funny. There is one bear behind them, between them and the lodge. Not sure if you can see him, which is totally fine. He's hunkered down. He might be on Lodge South. I haven't checked. But just so you guys know, there is another bear kind of close to these guys. Not doing too much. He's been sleeping for a while. So we are going to start to wrap up to say goodbye. Thank you so much for joining us on this very happy Halloween. We hope everyone has a very, very safe evening. Lots of fun trick-or-treating, lots of candy or chocolate or whatever floats your boat. Maybe toothpaste. I used to get toothpaste at one house when I was a kid. Was not my favorite house, not going to lie. But hey, that works too. So we're going to let you guys get back to polar bear viewing. We are going to be able to talk to you tomorrow about anything else you'd like to talk about if you do have questions. Tomorrow's kind of fun, just at noon. We're going to give you our top favorite polar bear facts, of which there are many, but we'll whittle it down to 10. And then we'd love it if you had favorite polar bear facts that you wanted to send us or questions about facts. That would be fun. And then next week is Polar Bear Week. So from November 4th to 10th is what we call Polar Bear Week. So we're going to be pushing out extra social media stuff. We're going to be doing Facebook Live as much as we can. We're going to be just celebrating polar bears all week and sharing ways that you can get involved with their conservation no matter where you live in the world. And next week's first live chat will be on Tuesday. And it is called What We Like About You, Polar Bear Citizens. And it's just to share, of course, great polar bear information, but also good news stories about what people are doing, things that are good for the planet or good for polar bears. So we're going to just share some great stuff going on, really positive. Some things that our friends, communities, kids, schools are doing to make the world a better place. It's going to be a super fun day. Hopefully lots of great polar bear action. If it's anything like the last couple days, then you really can't go wrong. Pretty great stuff. So we are going to head back to the lodge in a few minutes here, 20, 30 minutes. We'll see you there. Last night at the lodge, we did have a mom and cub, so that was pretty cool. Some of you saw that on the cam. Not sure if we'll see them tonight, especially with these big boys hanging close, but if we do, we'll let you know. Thank you so much for tuning in, and we'll talk to you tomorrow from the Tundra. Good night.